What's on your radar, Ryan?
So Joe Manchin is now coming at the Democrats' most prized achievement of 2021, the child tax credit, from two different directions. He's coming at it from the bottom by going after the poorest of the poor, effectively arguing they be cut out completely by instituting work requirements to get the tax credit. More on that in a moment. But he's also coming at it from the top, arguing that the current way it's being delivered, with the credit beginning to phase out at a household income of $150,000, though it phases out fairly slowly, meaning even people in the upper middle class still get a partial benefit. The program is designed that way partly because it's easier to administer it and easier for people to participate. Think about it this way. If you push the threshold down to $60,000, you might not be sure if you're going to earn more or less than that in a given year, so you might just opt not to take the credit so that you don't get hit with a tax bill in April. If it's way up at $150,000 with a gradual decline, you don't have to worry about it. So in July, the Congressional Research Service produced a chart showing how much of the credit you'd get at various incomes. The line looks like a set of stairs because Biden promised not to raise taxes on any household making less than $400,000, and that flat line goes all the way to the $200,000 mark for that reason. So if Manchin tries to mess with the formula much, he'll be forcing Biden to break a key campaign pledge. Now, we all know what happened to this guy after he raised taxes.
I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
And here's secretly recorded footage of the Democratic reaction when George H.W. Bush broke his promise. So Manchin is now saying he wants the child tax credit to start phasing out at $60,000, Axios reported over the weekend. Previously, HuffPost's Arthur Delaney had spoken with Manchin on this topic, and he told him, basically 90 million taxpayers file taxes of $50,000 or less. The mean household income for America is $68,000. If you're going to target the people that need it the most, the working. As it happens, Delaney had asked the Conservative Tax Foundation if it had researched what the budget impact of phasing it out at $60,000 would be, and he was told that it would only save 28% of the overall cost. That might sound strange since you're pushing the threshold down almost $100,000. You'd think you'd save a ton more money than that, right? Like at least half or more. The reason you don't is both obvious and also the reason we need to keep the credit in place. Most of the people getting the credit are actually struggling really, really badly. So many people in this country are clustered under that $60,000 income figure that being extremely stingy with the benefit doesn't even save the government much money. Manchin has certainly been briefed on these numbers, so his objection must be more political than anything else. He just doesn't want middle and upper middle class people getting a benefit. If they do get the benefit, it'll be harder to undermine the program in the future, and workers across the board will be less desperate in the labor market, and Manchin can't have that. Now, if he succeeds in stripping it from the middle class and those above them, that'll be a bad move on a number of levels, but if he succeeds in adding work requirements, it would be a catastrophe. Work requirements might sound like a good idea to people who hate the idea of somebody getting something for nothing. And sure, our politics have long been built on mountains of economic resentment. In 1996, Bill Clinton, quote, ended welfare as we know it by agreeing to a deal with Republicans that added time limits and work requirements to welfare. The result was that the number of children living in deep poverty roughly doubled over the next decade, even as the economy improved. Today, the poverty rate for a family of four is set at around $26,000, and deep poverty is defined as living on less than half that, which is just a bit over $1,000 a month for four people. That means living on about $8 per person or less per day. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities surveyed the literature on the effect of welfare reform, and the findings were unanimous. About 1 million children were thrown into deep poverty by the law. The number of children living with single mothers in deep poverty rose from 2.8% in 1995 to a shocking 5.8% by 2005. The poorest children were worse off during the Obama years thanks to this law than they were before welfare reform. The Washington Post reported yesterday that if Manchin's ideas were adopted, the number of West Virginia children benefiting from the CTC would be cut by 190,000. And I promise you, not many of them are kids on the upper end of that income scale. Now, the good news is that Manchin's idea of a work requirement for the CTC is so cruel and unworkable, he's very likely to drop it. On top of that, including it would block Democrats from using their favorite talking point, that they had cut child poverty in half. Now, they could also simply end child poverty by progressively increasing the size of the credit the lower down the income scale you get, but that's not a policy choice Democrats are prepared to make right now. Meanwhile, let's not forget that Manchin's own children have done quite well, and not exactly by pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. Manchin got his daughter, Heather Bresch, a job at Mylan, and she rose to be CEO, partly thanks to the University of West Virginia awarding her a fraudulent master's degree while Manchin was governor. She finished there by selling the company to Pfizer, which netted her a $30.8 million payout and led to the closure of the cherished Mylan plant in Morgantown, West Virginia. Her brother, Joe Manchin IV, does quite well for himself running his dad's coal companies. Does that count as work? As for Heather Bresch, she just turned 52 and she's retired. So pretty good work if you can get it, or pretty good not work if you can get it. So I do think that there's a good chance that Manchin drops his demand on the work requirements for the child tax credit. We were joking yesterday that he's going to, force these 5-year-olds to go work in his coal mines.
Right.
What he really means is he wants to force the parents to go work in the coal mines. But it's just so unworkable. Like, how do you, like, what's the income threshold? And now, in order to get a tax break, you have to work. So, what about other tax breaks? Like
the more, this is the reason I ultimately,
tax break?
I ultimately I don't like adding the work requirement. I mean, to play devil's advocate, I get the idea that maybe Manchin is getting at if you can be on welfare instead of working, is there any incentive to move off of welfare? But the problem is that it makes it so complicated trying to figure out, well, here's exactly how much. I mean, the child tax credit is a little bit complicated. There are some people even who would benefit from opting out of it, even if you do fall into that threshold for 1 year, because maybe your income changed drastically, maybe you're in a divorce, there's all sorts of scenarios, because it is kind of technically complicated and excessive tinkering. I don't like when the government does that. It's easier just to give people money, which is why I agree with you that probably changing here's the exact level at which this kicks in is beyond pointless, because it just makes it more confusing for people you're trying to help.
And the other incentive,
if you're trying to help people, just help people. Don't make it so complicated.
Exactly. And the other incentive that people have to continue working is that, let's say you have 2 kids, over 5, over 6, that's $500 like a month. That's a huge help for parents. But you can't live on it. So you still have to work. Like, you still need another source of income on top of that. Now, if you're living on $8 a day, and all of a sudden you get $500, that's moving you into a different category. Finally, you have a tiny bit of breathing room that maybe you can start to get your life back together.
Yeah, I think the best case for the child tax credit is that so many of the things that parents rely on to educate their to raise kids, like education, daycare, et cetera, have gotten so much more inordinately expensive compared to other things in society. Like, cost of owning a TV has gone down, but cost of daycare has gone way, way, way up. And it would be great to have policies that bring the cost of those things down, but in lieu of that, doing something like this, I see the argument for it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Looking forward to your radar up next.